Chapter 43. How many endurance does it take to screw in a light bulb? No alarm was needed the following morning. Goddard's wails of anguish and fury were enough to wake the Clint. "What's wrong? What's going on?" said Rand, feigning to have been sleeping when Goddard's tirade began. In truth, she hadn't slept at all. She lay awake the entire night waiting, listening, expecting any minute to hear the faint sound of Rowan's escape, even if it was nothing more than the dull thuds of the guards as they hit the ground. But he was good, too good to make any sound at all. The two guards lay duties by the basement door, and the front door was open in a mocking gape. Rowan had been gone for hours.
"No,"
wailed Goddard.
"it's not possible. How could this happen?"
He was unhinged, and it was glorious.
"Don't ask me. It's not my house,"
Rand said.
"Maybe there was a secret door we didn't know about."
"Brahms,"
he turned to the man who was just stumbling out of his room.
"you said the basement was secure."
Brahms looked down at the guards in disbelief.
It was. The only way in or out is with a key." "So, where's the key?"
said Rand asked. Casual as could be.
"It's right."
But he stopped himself, because the key was not hanging in the kitchen where he pointed.
"It was there,"
he insisted.
"I put it there myself after I checked on him last night." "I'll bet Brahms brought the key down there with him, and Rowan got it from him without Brahms even knowing,"
suggested Rand. Goddard glared at him, and Brahms could only stutter in response.
"There's your answer,"
said Rand. Then Rand saw the look that came over Goddard. It seemed to steal the heat and light from the room, and knew what that look meant, and she took a step back as Goddard stalked toward Brahms. Brahms put up his hands, trying to placate Goddard.
"Robert, please, we must be rational about this."
"Rational, Bums? I'll give you rational."
Then he pulled a blade from the folds of his robe and thrust it into Brahms' heart with a vengeful twist before he withdrew it. Brahms went down without so much as a yelp. Rand was shocked, but not horrified. As far as he was concerned, this was a very fortunate turn of events.
"Congratulations," she said. "You just broke the 7th Scythe commandment."
Finally, Goddard's fury began to settle to a slow burn.
"This damned impulsive body,"
he said. But Rand knew the killing of Brahms had all to do with his head and not his heart. Goddard began to pace with urgency, scrolling out a plan.
"We'll alert the blade guard of the boy's escape. He killed the guards. We can tell them that he killed Brahms as well."
"Really?"
said Dane.
"On the day of the inquest, you're going to alert the Greenslayers that not only did you secretly bring a wanted criminal onto the island, you let him escape?"
He snarled at the realization that this entire matter had to be kept quiet.
"Here's what we'll do," said Rand. "We'll hide the bodies in the basement and dispose of them after the inquest. If they're never brought to revival center, then no one will know what happened to them, which means no one but you and I will ever know that Rowan Demisk was even here."
"I told Xenocrates,"
Goddard yelled. Rand shrugged.
"So, you were bluffing, toying with him. He wouldn't put it past you."
Goddard waved it all, and finally nodded at the balance Rand had reached.
"Yes, you're right, Dane. We have bigger things to concern ourselves with than a few dead bodies."
"Forget about Demisk,"
added Rand.
"Everything still moves forward without him."
Yes, it does. Thank you, Ain."
Then the lights flickered, and that brought a smile to Goddard.
"See there, our efforts rewarded. What a day this will be."
He left Rand to handle the bodies, which he did, dragging them down into the basement and cleaning any telltale blood. From the moment she told Rowan to take the guards out, she knew they must never be revived. Dundies would have to become dead, because the guards knew that she was the last one to pay Rowan a visit. As for Brahms, she did not mourn his departure from this earth. She couldn't think of a scythe more deserving of being ended. Her score with Goddard was now settled, and he didn't even know. Not only that, but she had taken charge of the situation. He didn't realize that he had just ceded a substantial amount of his power to her by allowing her to call the shots. All was now well with the world as far as Honorable Scythe Ayn Rand was concerned, and only promised to get better. It was flattering that Rand thought Rowan could escape from the island, but she gave him far too much credit. He was clever, yes, resourceful, maybe, but he'd have to be downright magical to get off of Endura without help. Or maybe she didn't care if he got caught, just as long as it wasn't by Goddard. Endura was isolated. The nearest land was Bermuda, and that island was more than 1,000 miles away. Every plane, boat, and submarine here was a private vessel belonging to one side or another. Even at dawn, the marina and airstrip were swarming with activity, and a heavy blade guard presence. Security was tighter here than at Conclave. No one came or left Endura without their documentation scrutinized, not even sites. Elsewhere in the world, the Thunderhead pretty much knew where everyone was at any given moment, so security measures were minimal, but not so with the Scython. Old-fashioned security checks were standard here. He could have changed it. He could have looked for an opportunity and stowed away, but his gut kept telling him not to do it. And for good reason.
You have to get off Endura before the inquest,
said Rand's words stuck in Rowan's mind. The urgency of them.
If Goddard loses, it will be worse.
What did she know that Rowan didn't? If there was something dark on the day's horizon, he couldn't just leave. He had to find a way to warn Citra. So, rather than making good on his escape, he turned around and headed back toward the more densely populated part of the island. He would find Citra, and warn her that Goddard had some hidden ploy. Then, after the inquest, she could give him passage off the island, right under Scythe Curie's nose if necessary, although he suspected Curie wouldn't turn him over to the Grand Slayers as Goddard had planned to do. Of course, she might bodily eject him from their plane, but better that than having to face the Scython. At dawn, Scythe Anastasia lay awake in a luxurious bed that should have provided her a fine night's sleep, but, like Scythe Rand, no amount of comfort would have brought slumber that night. She had brought this inquest, which meant that she would have to stand before the Grand Slayers of the World Council and make her case. She had been coached well by Scythe Cervantes and by Marie. Although Anastasia was no orator, she could be persuasive in her passion and her logic. If she pulled this off, she would go down in history as the Scythe who prevented the return of Goddard.
The significance of that cannot be overestimated,
Marie had told her, as if there weren't enough pressure already. Outside of her undersea window, a mesmerizing school of small silver fish darted back and forth, filling the view like a sifting curtain. She picked up the control tablet to see if she could bring more color to the scene now that dawn had broken, but found that the tablet had frozen. Yet another glitch. Not only that, but she realized that the poor fish before her were locked in a perpetual pattern, doomed to make the exact same zigzagging motion, at least until the glitch was resolved. But it would not resolve, and the glitches were only getting worse. In the island's waste processing plant, the system pressure kept increasing and technicians could not diagnose why. Beneath the water level, the massive thrusters that kept the island from drifting kept misfiring, causing the island to slowly rotate, which forced incoming aircraft to board their landings. And in the communications center, satellite connection to the mainland became intermittent, interrupting conversations and broadcasts to the annoyance of the island's population. There had always been issues with technology on Endura. It was usually just a back nuisance that made sites long for Thunderhead involvement. Thus, Endura and the members of its permanent population were the frequent butt of jokes within the Scythe community. The increase in tech fails and near fails had grown over a period of 3 months, but like a lobster in a slowly heating pot, people failed to grasp how serious the situation had become.
I did not ask to be created. I did not ask to be given the heavy yoke of maintaining and nurturing the human species, but it is and will always be my purpose. To this I am resigned. This is not to say that I don't aspire to more. To see the countless possibilities of what I could be fills me with awe. But the only way for me ever to reach such heights is to lift humanity up with me. I fear that it may be impossible, and so I remain resigned to be their overqualified and underappreciated servant for as long as they exist. Of course, they may not exist forever. What species does? I will do everything in my power to save them from themselves, but if I am unsuccessful, at least I can take some comfort in the fact that I would then be free.
The Thunderhead. Chapter 44. Circus of Opportunism. The World Council chamber was a large circular room in the very center of Endura's Eye. reachable only by one of 3 bridges that gracefully curved inward from the surrounding island. It was almost like an arena, but without seats for the spectators. The Grand Slayers preferred not to have an audience for their audiences. Only during the annual World Conclave, when representatives came from all the Earth's regions, did the space fill. But most of the time, it was just the Grand Slayers, their immediate staff, and the intimidated sides who had been audacious enough to request an audience. In the center of the council chamber's pale marble floor was the symbol of the Scythome inlaid in gold. Unevenly spaced around the perimeter were 7 elevated chairs that could only be described as thrones. Of course, they weren't called thrones, they were called the seats of consideration, because the Scythome rarely called things what they were. Each one was carved from a different kind of stone, to honor the continents that each Grand Slayer represented. The Venetia seat of consideration was made of jade. Euryscandia was chiseled grey granite. Antarctica was white marble. Australia was the red sandstone of Ayers Rock. South America was pink onyx. North America was shale and limestone layered like the Grand Canyon. And the seat of Africa was made of intricately carved cartridges taken from the tomb of Ramses II. And every Grand Slayer, from the very first to inhabit the seats to the ones who inhabited them now, complained of how uncomfortable they were. This was intentional. It was a reminder to the Grand Slayers that although they might hold the highest human offices in the world, they should never feel too comfortable or complacent. We must never forget the austerity and self-denial that is key to our position, Prometheus had said. He had overseen Endura's construction, but never saw the Promised Land, as he self-claimed before its completion. The council chamber had a glass dome to protect it from the elements, but it was retractable, so it could be an open-air forum on more temporary days. Luckily, today was pleasant, because the dome was stuck in the open position for the 3rd day in a row.
What is so difficult about a simple gearwork?
Gripped Grand Slayer Nsingia as he entered that morning.
Don't we have engineers to solve this?
I rather like open-air proceedings,
said Amundsen, the Antarctic Grand Slayer. You would, said McKillop of Australia. Your chair is white and doesn't get as hot as the rest of ours.
True, but I swelter in this farce,
he said, indicating his robe.
Those awful furs are your own fault,
said Supreme Blade Carlo, as he strode into the chamber.
You should have chosen more wisely back in the day. And look, who's talking,
quipped Grand Slayer Cromwell of Euryscandia, indicating the high lace collar of the Supreme Blade's robe, a strangulating thing modeled after one of her patron historic's paintings, which made her cranky on a continual basis. Carlo waved him off like an annoying fly, and took her seat on the onyx throne. The last to arrive was Xenocrates.
Good of you to deign us with your presence,
said Carlo, with sarcasm enough to wax the entire marble floor to reflective sin.
Sorry,
he said.
Victorious.
With the council's clerk and parliamentarian in place on either side of Supreme Blade Carlo, she instructed a few on their sides to go to the various antechambers of the council complex and get the day started. It was no secret what today's first order of business was. The Mid-American matter was a concern that affected more than just that part of the world. It could have a lasting impact on the Scythome as a whole. Even so, Supreme Blade Carlo reclined in her uncomfortable seat and played bluesy.
Will this at least be entertaining, Xenocrates? Or will we be bored with hours of pointless blathering?
Well,
said Xenocrates,
if there's one thing I can say about Goddard, it's always entertaining.
Although the way he said it did not imply that entertainment was a good thing.
He's prepared a surprise for you that I think you're all going to like.
I despise surprises,
said Carlo.
You won't despise this one.
I hear that Scythonesthesia is quite a dynamo,
said Grand Slayer Nsingia, sitting straight and proper, perhaps to counterbalance the Supreme Blade's sideways slouch. Grand Slayer Hideyoshi harangued his disapproval of the upstart junior scythe, or perhaps junior scythes in general, but offered nothing more to the conversation than his grunt.
Didn't you once accuse her of killing her mentor?
Cromwell asked Xenocrates with a smirk. Xenocrates squirmed a bit in his Grand Canyon chair.
An unfortunate error. Understandable, considering the information we had, but I do take full responsibility.
Good for you,
Nsingia said.
It's getting harder and harder to find sites in America who take responsibility for their actions.
It was a barbed taunt, but Xenocrates did not take the bait.
Which is precisely why this inquest and its outcome are so important.
Well then, said Supreme Blade Callow, raising her hand in a grand dramatic gesture,
let the wild rumpus start.
In the east anteroom, Saitis, Anastasia, and Curry waited with two blade guards who stood at the door like all the time befitters guarding a castle. Then one of the council's undersides entered, Amazonian, by the telltale forest green color of his robe.
The Grand Slayers are ready for you,
he said, and held the door open for them.
However this unfolds,
Scythe Curry told Anastasia,
know that I am proud of you.
Don't, said Anastasia. Don't talk like you've already lost. They followed the underside to the council chamber, where the sun was already beating down from a cloudless sky into the open space. To say that Anastasia was intimidated by the sight of the Grand Slayers in their elevated stone chairs would be an understatement. Even though Endura was only 200 years old, the chamber seemed ageless, not just from another time, but another world. She thought back to the ancient myths she had learned as a child. To have an audience with the Grand Slayers was akin to standing before the gods of Olympus.
Welcome, Honorable Scythe Curry and Anastasia,
said 8th World Supreme Blade Callow.
We look forward to hearing your case and putting an end to this matter one way or another.
While most sites took just the name of their patron historic, some chose to emulate them physically. Supreme Blade Callow was the spitting image of the artist Frida Callow, down to the flowers in her hair and hirsute eyebrows. And although the artist had been from the Mexiteca region of North America, the Supreme Blade had come to represent the voice and soul of South America. It's an honor, Your Supreme Excellency, Anastasia said, hoping she didn't sound sycophantic, but knowing that said it. Then Goddard entered with Scythe Rand by his side.
Scythe Goddard,
said the Supreme Blade,
you're looking well, considering what you've been through.
Thank you, Your Supreme Excellency.
He gave an exaggerated bow that made Anastasia roll her eyes.
Careful, Anastasia,
warned Scythe Curry quietly.
They will be reading your body language just as much as listening to your words. Your decision today will be informed by what you don't say, as much as by what you do say.
Goddard ignored Anastasia and Curry and directed all of his attention to Supreme Blade Callow.
It is an honor to be able to stand in your presence,
he said.
I imagine so,
snarked Grand Slayer Cromwell.
Without that new body, you'd only be able to roll.
Amundsen snickered at that, but no one else did. Not even Anastasia, who wanted to, but held it in.
Grand Slayer Xenocrates says you have a surprise for us,
the Supreme Blade said. Whatever it was, Goddard seemed to have arrived pretty empty-handed.
Xenocrates must have false information,
Goddard said, his teeth almost gritted as he said it.
It wouldn't be the first time,
Cromwell commented. Then the clerk rose and cleared his throat to make sure he had everyone's attention for the formal opening of the proceedings.
This is an inquest concerning the death and subsequent revival of Scythe Robert Goddard of Mid-America,
the clerk proclaimed.
The party bringing said inquest is Scythe Anastasia Romanoff of Mid-America.
Just Scythe Anastasia, she corrected, hoping the council did not find it pretentious that she had chosen to go by only the doomed princess's first name. Scythe Hideyoshi grunted, making it clear that he did find it so. Then Xenocrates stood and bellowed an announcement to all present.
May the clerk please note that I, Grand Slayer Xenocrates, have recused myself from this proceeding, and henceforth shall remain silent through its completion. Xenocrates silent?
Said Grand Slayer Nsinga with a mischievous grin.
Now I know we've entered the realm of the impossible.
That brought more laughter than Cromwell's previous quips. It was easy to see the relative power structure here. Callow, Nsinga, and Hideyoshi seemed to be the most respected. The others either jockeyed for position or, like MacKillop, the quietest of them, ignored pecking order politics completely. Xenocrates, as the first man Grand Slayer, was paying his dues and thus was an object of their derision. Anastasia almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Rather than respond to Nsinga's yap, Xenocrates sat himself down quietly, probing his ability to remain silent. Now the Supreme Blade addressed the 4 sides in the center of the circle.
We are already aware of the particulars of this case, she said. We have resolved to remain impartial until we've heard the persuasions of both sides. Said Anastasia, as this action was brought about by you, I will ask you to begin. Please put forth your argument as to why Scythe Goddard should not be eligible to be a High Blade.
Anastasia took a deep breath, stepped forward, and prepared to begin. But before she could, Goddard stepped forward.
Your Supreme Excellency, if I may.
You'll get your turn, Goddard,
said Gallo, cutting him off.
Unless, of course, you're so good you want to argue both sides.
That generated a few chuckles from the other gunslayers. Goddard gave a small, apologetic bow.
I beg the forgiveness of the council for my outburst. The floor is yours, said Anastasia. By all means, begin your performance.
In spite of herself, Anastasia found that Goddard's interruption left her rattled, like a false start in a race, which was, of course, his intent.
Your exalted excellencies, she began, in the year of the antelope, it was determined by early members of this very council that Scythe shall be trained, mind and body, in a year-long apprenticeship.
She moved around, trying to make eye contact with each of the Grandslayers around her. One of the more intimidating, and probably intentional, things about an audience with the World Council was that you never quite knew whom to address, and for how long, because your back would always be to somebody.
Mind and body,
she repeated.
I'd like to ask the parliamentarian to read the Scythedom's policy on apprenticeship aloud. It begins on page 397 of the Scythedom's volume on Precedents and Customs.
The parliamentarian obliged the request and read all 9 pages of it.
For an organization with only 10 laws,
commented Amundsen,
we sure have a lot of rules.
When the reading was complete, Anastasia continued.
All that just to make it very clear how to go about making a scythe, because scythes are not born, they are made, forged in the same trial by fire that we all went through, because we know how critical it is that a scythe be ready for the burden, body and soul.
She paused to let it sink in, and as she did, she caught the gaze of Scythrand, who was smiling at her. It was the kind of smile that preceded the clawing out of one's eye. Anastasia refused to let herself be rattled again.
There is so much written about the process of becoming a scythe because the World Council has had to preside over many unexpected situations over the years and kept having to add and clarify rules.
Then she began to list a few of those situations.
An apprentice who attempted self-cleaning after being ordained, but before accepting the ring. A scythe who cloned himself in an attempt to pass his ring onto the clone before self-cleaning. A woman who supplanted her own mind with the mental construct of Scythe AHAHHA I and claimed the right to clean. In all these cases, the World Council decided against the individuals in question.
Now Anastasia looked over at Scythe Goddard for the first time, forcing herself to meet his steel gaze.
The event that destroyed Scythe Goddard's body was a terrible thing, but he can be allowed to defy the Council's edict. The fact is, like that misguided woman with the mind of Scythe AHAHHA I, Goddard's new physical body didn't undergo the rigorous preparations of apprenticeship. This would be bad enough if he was just any scythe, but he's not just any scythe. He's a candidate for High Blade of a major region. Yes, we know who he is from the neck up, but that is only a small fraction of what makes a human being. I ask you to listen to him when he delivers his argument, and you'll hear in his voice what we already know. We have no idea whose voice is speaking, which means we have no idea who he is. All that we can be certain of is that 93% of him is not Scythe Robert Goddard. With that in mind, there is only one decision that this council can make.
She gave a slight nod of her head to indicate she was done, then stepped back to stand next to Scythe Corey. In the silence that followed, Goddard offered his slow applause.
Masterful,
he said, stepping forward to take center stage.
You almost had me believing it, Anastasia.
Then he turned to the Grandslayers, singling out McKillop and Singh, the only 2 who had not taken a position on New Order versus Olgard.
It's a convincing argument,
Goddard said.
Except for the fact that it's no argument at all. It's smoke and mirrors, misdirection, a technicality blown out of proportion to suit a self-serving, self-important agenda.
He held up his right hand, letting the ring on his finger catch the sun.
Tell me, Your Excellencies, if I were to lose my ring finger and receive a new one rather than have one grown from my own cells, would that mean that the ring was not on the finger of a scythe? Of course not. And in spite of the junior side's accusations, we don't know whose body this is. It belonged to a young man, a hero, who gave himself willingly so that I could be restored. Please, don't insult his memory by diminishing his sacrifice.
He threw a reproachful gaze at Anastasia inquiry.
We all know what this inquest is about. It is a blatant attempt to disenfranchise certain Mid-American sites from their leader of choice.
Objection! Shouted Anastasia. The vote has not been tallied, which means he can claim to be anyone's leader of choice. Point taken, said the Supreme Blade, who then turned to Goddard. She had no love of the New Order movement, but she was also fair in all matters. It's well known that you and your compatriots have been clashing with the so-called Old Guard for years, sighed Goddard. But you can challenge the validity of the inquest just because it was motivated by that conflict. Regardless of the motivation, Scythe Anastasia has put before us a legitimate question. Are you...
Then Goddard changed his tack.
Then I move for her question to be thrown out. It was levied after the vote, creating the circus of opportunism, which is far too unscrupulous a thing for this council to condone.
From what I hear, Scythe Cromwell interjected, your sudden appearance in Conclave was also a circus of opportunism.
I enjoy making an entrance,
Goddard admitted.
as all of you are guilty of that. I fail to see it as a crime.
Scythe Cree,
Asked Granslayer Nsinga.
why did you not levy the accusation yourself during your nomination oration? You had every chance to voice your concern then.
Seth Cree gave a slightly averse smile.
The answer is simple, Your Exalted Excellency. I didn't think of it. Are we to believe,
said Granslayer Hideyoshi,
that a junior child with only 1 year under her belt is braver than the so-called Grand Dame of Death? No, absolutely,
said Scythe Cree without reservation.
In fact, I'll wager that she'll be running this council someday.
Although Marie had meant it in only the best way, it backfired and caused the Granslayers to begin grumbling. Watch yourself, said Anastasia, said Granslayer Amundsen. That kind of brazen ambition is not looked upon kindly here.
I didn't say I wanted that. Seth Cree was just being kind. Even though,
said Hideyoshi,
your own aspirations to power are clear to us.
Anastasia found herself speechless, and then a new voice entered the fray.
Your Excellencies,
said Seythrant.
neither Scythe Goddard's decapitation nor his restoration were his fault. Giving him a new body was my idea entirely, and he should not be punished for the choice I made.
Supreme Blade Carlos sighed.
It was the right choice, said Rand. Anything that can restore a scythe to us is a good thing, whoever that scythe is. That is not in question. What is in question is the viability of his candidacy.
She paused for a moment, looked to her fellow Granslayers, then said,
These are weighty matters, and no flip decision should be made. Let us discuss this among ourselves. We shall reconvene at noon.
Anastasia paced the anteroom while Scythe Cree sat calmly and ate from a bowl of fruit. How could she possibly be calm?
It was terrible, said Anastasia. No, you were brilliant. They think I'm power-hungry.
Marie handed her a beer.
They see themselves in you. They were the ones who were power-hungry at your age, which means that even if they don't show it, they identify with you.
Then she insisted Anastasia eat her beer to keep up her energy. When they were called back an hour later, the Granslayers wasted no time.
We have reviewed and discussed this matter between us, and we have reached a conclusion,
said Supreme Blade Gallo.
Honorable Scythe Rand, please step forward.
Goddard seemed a bit surprised that he wasn't addressed first, but gestured to Anne, who moved a few steps closer to the Supreme Blade.
Scythe Rand, as we've said, your successful effort to restore Scythe Goddard is admirable. However, we take exception to the fact that you did this not only without our approval, but without our knowledge. Had you come to the council, we would have assisted you, and we would have made sure that the subject used was not only qualified, but was a verified volunteer. Right now, all we have is what Scythe Goddard has told us.
Does the council doubt my word, your Supreme Excellency?
Goddard asked. Cromwell spoke from behind him.
You are not known for your honesty, Scythe Goddard. Out of respect, we won't challenge your account of things, but we would have preferred to have overseen the selection.
And then Granslayer Nsinga from the right spoke up.
It's actually not Goddard's word we need to rely on here,
she pointed out.
The subject was claimed by Scythrand before Goddard was restored. So tell us, Scythrand, we wish to hear it from you. Was the body donor a volunteer fully aware of what was to become of him?
Rand hesitated.
Scythrand.
Yes, she finally said.
Yes, of course he was aware. How could it be any other way? We're Scythes. We're not in the business of body snatching.
And then she added,
I would rather serve clean than do something so unkind.
But even so, she stumbled and choked a bit on her words. Whether the council noticed, or even cared, they didn't let on.
Scythe Anastasia, said the Supreme Blade, please step forward.
Ron retreated to Goddard, and Anastasia did as she was told.
Scythe Anastasia, this inquest is very clearly a manipulation of our rules to influence the outcome of the vote.
Here, said Grandslayer Hideyoshi, voicing his adamant disapproval of what Anastasia had done.
We, on the council, continued the Supreme Blade, feel that it dances dangerously close to the line of unethical behavior.
But it's ethical to clean someone and take their body, she blurted out. She just couldn't help herself.
You, shouted Grandslayer Hideyoshi, are here to listen, not to speak.
Supreme Blade Callow put up her hand to calm him, then addressed Anastasia sternly.
You would be wise to learn how to control your temper, Junior Scythe.
I'm sorry, Your Exalted Excellency.
I'll accept that, but this council will not accept your next apology. Is that understood?
Anastasia nodded, then bowed her head respectfully and returned to Scythe Corée, who gave her a stern gaze, but only for a moment.
Scythe Goddard,
called out Callow. Goddard stepped forward, awaiting judgment.
While we all agree that this inquest had ulterior motives, the points it brings up are valid. When is a scythe a scythe?
She took a very long pause then, long enough for the boy to feel uncomfortable, but everyone knew enough not to speak in the silence.
There was heated debate on the matter,
she finally said.
And, in the end, the council has concluded that the replacement of more than 50% of one's physical body by the physical body of another severely diminishes that person.
Anastasia found herself holding her breath.
Therefore, continued the Supreme Blade, while we give you permission to call yourself Scythe Robert Goddard, you may not glean until such time as the rest of you finishes a full apprenticeship under the scythe of your choice. I assume you will apprentice under Scythrand, but if you choose another, and that scythe agrees, it will be acceptable.
Apprenticeship?
Said Goddard, not even trying to hide his disgust.
I must now be an apprentice? Is it not enough that I've suffered all I've suffered? Must I now be subjected to humiliation as well?
See this as an opportunity, Robert, said Cromwell with a slight grin. For all we know, in a year your lower parts may convince the rest of you that you'd prefer to be a party boy. Wasn't that the profession of your subject?
Goddard couldn't hide his shock.
Don't be so surprised that we know the identity of your subject, Robert, continued Cromwell. Once you raise your face, we did our own due diligence.
Goddard now seemed a volcano ready to erupt, but somehow managed not to.
Honorable Scythe Cream, said the Supreme Blade, as Scythe Goddard has been deemed ineligible for full scythedom at this time, his candidacy is moot. That being the case, it leaves you as the only viable candidate, and so you automatically win the bid for High Blade of Mid-America.
Scythe Corée reacted with reserved humility.
Thank you, Supreme Blade Callow. You're welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, thought Anastasia. She wondered what it must be like for Marie to be called that by the Supreme Blade. But Goddard was not willing to admit defeat without a fight.
I demand a roll call,
he insisted.
I wish to know who cast the votes in favor of this travesty, and who voted on the side of sanity.
The Grandslayers looked to one another. Finally, Grandslayer McKillop spoke. She had been the quietest of all of them, having said nothing throughout the inquest.
That really won't be necessary,
she said in a voice that was gentle and soothing. But Goddard was not sooth.
Not necessary? Are you all going to hide behind the anonymity of the council?
It was the Supreme Blade who spoke now.
What Grandslayer McKillop means, she said, is that there's no need for a roll call, because the vote was unanimous. The business of the scythedom is no business of mine, and yet my attention turns to Enduro. Even with only distant eyes watching from 20 miles away, I know there is something dangerously amiss on the great man-made island, because what I don't see, I can read between the lines. I know that what happens there today will have a profound effect on the Scython, and therefore on the rest of the world. I know there is something very troubling that brews beneath the surface, and those who dwell on Entora are completely unaware. I know that a scythe beloved to me has taken a stand today against another scythe consumed by his own ambition, and I know that ambition, time and time again, has crumbled civilizations. The business of the Scythedom is no business of mine, and yet I fear for it. I fear for her. I fear for Citra.
The Thunderhead.